being intoxicated is not going to prevent you from receiving basic human entitlement. In the beginning, when people come in, the basic idea is, as an organization, we have an obligation to make recovery attractive to them. They become Little League coaches. They become a district attorney.
Right.
They become a business owner. They become an employer. They become a softball mom. They become a volunteer in the community. For a lot of the folks that walk through our doors, for somebody to believe in them is hard to quantify in terms of the importance of that.
This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 Lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends, everyday people just like you and me, about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hello, welcome to the Turn Your Life Around podcast. We have a great guest today. We have Chris Budnick. He's the Executive Director of Healing Transitions, and he's an adjunct professor in the School of Social Work at NC State University. We're going to have a great chat about his story, his recovery story, healing transitions, and whatever else he wants to talk about. So welcome to the podcast.
Sarah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join you here, and have heard about your work and learned about the podcast through John Fry. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I know you're busy, so thanks for taking your time out. We were just chatting before we got started about your running. And so is that something you do on a regular basis?
Yeah. So John's had a big influence on a lot of people. And he's part of that community has gotten me more active with certain things. So what I started doing a couple of years ago was walking with a 40-pound vest as a way to build strength, and also kind of takes your mind off things because you're walking with some weight and you're kind of feeling that. You're focused on that and not focused on the other things that are happening in your day-to-day life. So so my goal's been 60 miles a month with the vest. And last year at the Oakwood 24, I managed to do 41 miles with the vest in 24 hours and got in 1,000 push-ups and something else.
That's incredible. Yeah. I know I was joking that I went on a walk this morning, a 2-mile walk with my dog, and I wore a 5-pound vest, and it was kind of difficult. So I can't imagine 40
Yeah.
pounds.
So, but I mean, like what's come from being around people like John and the F3 community is it's me versus me, you know, and any type of movement's good and, you know, something to be celebrated. But I do find that I can go further sometimes with people as opposed to by myself.
That's probably true in a lot of group exercise, you know, kind of work.
And in a lot of ways, just a lot of things in life, you know.
It's true. Yeah. When you go it solo, it's more difficult. Yeah. So Healing Transitions, you're the executive director. How on earth did you get involved there? Yeah.
So I really kind of looked to, you know, some spiritual intervention maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got into recovery in 1990 from going to addiction inpatient treatment, and I'd majored in psychology because I was familiar with going to see counselors growing up.
Yeah.
And with a few years of recovery, I started wondering, like, as I got ready to graduate with an undergrad in psychology, what does that actually mean? And I had an opportunity in 1993 to do an internship, and it just happened to be at a residential treatment facility. It was the only place that offered one to me. And then they hired me. And so very quickly, I kind of found myself doing this work.
Yeah.
In August of 94, I was looking to relocate down here. I was dating a girl going to school at Duke. And so interviewed at a few places. And the place that I interviewed at was one of the places was Charter Northridge. And the director of nursing was underwhelmed with my experience and lack of credentials, but the position that I was interviewing for was held by a woman who was going from inpatient to outpatient, and she was from Rhode Island, and she was homesick. So I come back and interview with her, and within 90 seconds of meeting her, she well, we discovered that she worked at the inpatient treatment center I went through, so in Rhode Island. So
wow.
So based on all of a sudden, this connection, she persuades the director of nursing to give me a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to work with the guy that would become the founding executive director for Healing Transitions, which at the time was called the Healing Place of Wake County.
Okay.
So I met Dennis in 1994, and in 1998, he reached out and said, maybe 99, he reached out and said, maybe you could do your MSW field placement with me. And so that's kind of what led me to the work, really, again, so the chance encounters and connections and synergy. And the sad part of the story for me, though, is, while this has all led me to, being at an organization for a long time and having a lot of impact, is that this woman, Nancy's son, was served by us and passed from addiction. So she played a role in getting me a job, which led to, where I am today. And, sadly, she dealt with some serious loss,
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, you mentioned synergy. It made me think of, it's not what you know, it's who you know a lot of times in life. And so, how serendipitous that she was there and that connection.
And I just had a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And just kind of looking back, I could see that there was a larger force kind of putting people in places in my path, which really kind of led me just to say, all right, so this opportunity exists. How do I try to maximize and give my best to it?
Yeah. So tell the listeners a little bit about Healing Transitions. What is it? What's the mission, in case they haven't heard of it?
Yeah. Excellent question. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So in the 1990s, Wake County was looking at the issues of homelessness in the community. Mm-hmm. What they discovered was that there was no existing shelter that would allow people to come in if they'd been drinking.
Right.
And so as a consequence, there was a fair number of people who were unsheltered, homeless, with substance use issues going on. And EMS really kind of described it well in 1997. They said, we did 2,000 transports of individuals who were homeless and intoxicated to local emergency department, primarily Wake Med. Mm-hmm. 2 individuals made up 19% of the transports. And Wake Med, EMS said, we need a better solution, because when they get to Wake Med, if they can't get them to a different level of care, they got to stay there till they sober up.
Right.
And at the time, there were only 16 publicly funded detox beds in the community. I worked for the county on weekends, and it'd often be hard to get somebody into one of those beds. So the idea initially, and the recommendation back to the county commissioners, was just find a place that's not an emergency department for people to sober up who are homeless, and create a good resource for first responders so that they can get back to the business that they are needed to provide in the community. Well, I was driving out here, drove past her neighborhood, and a nurse for Wake County Public Health was tasked with looking into detox models, and she discovered this program in Louisville, Kentucky called the Healing Place. And the Healing Place had this detox that was designed to be an alternate destination to emergency departments and jails. Mm-hmm. They had a shelter that they said was a wet shelter. Today, we'd kind of call it a low barrier shelter, meaning you can come in under the influence. You just can't bring in alcohol or drugs with you, but being intoxicated is not going to prevent you from receiving basic human entitlement. And then what really impressed this woman, Linda, was they had a recovery program that was peer-based, and it served as a ladder or a pathway out of these low-barrier services of detox and shelter. And so some people from the community went there and became very interested in bringing the model to the community. And so we operate, our mission is to serve homeless, uninsured, and underserved adults. We do that through 2 campuses. We have a men's campus that opened in 2001. We had a women's campus open in 2006. 3 primary services: non-medical detox, low barrier shelter, and peer-run recovery program, and then have expanded to include some other things over the years: family education, family support, transition case management, healthcare coordination. 2018, we launched a partnership with EMS, working with advanced practice paramedics to add peers to assist them with overdose reversals and add a different
Right.
type of resource. And that way there's community engagement with people.
Yeah.
And our kind of guiding principles are to try to remove or lower barriers to access, provide services on demand. So when somebody shows up or first responder wants to bring somebody, we always, will accommodate them.
Right.
Work with people as many times as is necessary, use a peer model. Peers are not at the exclusion of professional services, but peers can often help people develop a sense of hope that that services can help them,
Right.
and can serve to help link and engage with that. And that's kind of in a nutshell what our model is. We're large campuses. We averaged about 306 a night at our men's campus in September, and about 165 at our women's campus.
I had no idea that it was that large. I mean, I knew what Healing Transitions was, obviously, but I didn't know that many.
It is.
My goodness.
And the community often doesn't recognize that, if we weren't there, oftentimes putting mats down on the floor to take people in, then there's usually like three kind of alternative outcomes. One is they're at a higher level of care, like an emergency department, or they're in a jail, or they may be, for lack of a better word, not engaged in services. And if somebody's not engaged in services, that has a public health, public safety kind of component to it. And we've really been extending ourselves, particularly at our men's campus, because there's been a real crisis since COVID in terms of lack of emergency shelter. So our admin building kind of turns into a temporary drop-in shelter at night with mats down. And we're in the process of kind of scaling that back to a more sustainable solution.
And so, but like these people, you just mentioned the men's campus and turning the admin building into a sleeping shelter. What do they do in the morning?
So for the men in the using our drop-in shelter services, they leave and then they may go to someplace like Oak City Cares. They may go to a temporary, employment situation, or they may just be waiting the day until they can find, a chance to come back and get shelter for the night. So
I gotcha.
A fair amount of people with significant medical issues and other disabilities that, contribute to chronic homelessness.
And you mentioned since COVID, it's been more of a crisis. Yeah.
So one of the understandable things that happened during COVID is that congregant living settings had to reduce capacity, us included, and some of those shelter beds that existed in the community before COVID haven't returned to their regular capacity. So reduced shelter beds, and then just a rise in homelessness. So those two factors have contributed to, a real crisis. We're in a situation where we're supposed to be scaling back our men's drop-in shelter, but another provider that stepped in, they're losing their space December 31st. And so that could be 150 beds for men, particularly during cold weather nights, that aren't available. So the community's faced with some tough decisions and how to try to respond to this.
Yeah. Are you all able to work with any, county and local government officials to try to assist with this issue?
Yeah, we're really excited. Wake County's got a new housing director named Morgan Mansa, and she started, I want to say October 1st. And so she's been a great collaborator. The city's done more than they have traditionally in coming into this space, something that historically has kind of been a primary responsibility of the county. The city's really been innovative, been very engaged, and they've got a new pilot project called Bringing Neighbors Home, which is a pilot project to work on folks who are in encampments to try to get them into housing through some direct assistance. So really excited about both the county and the city in terms of their participation in being a community partner with this, as well as a lot of other great nonprofits. And interestingly, you'll have some foundations that don't normally get into the provider space, but A.J. Fletcher Foundation, for instance, has devoted a lot of resources to trying to support the community and brainstorm solutions and so forth.
And my understanding is there is like a volunteering work kind of requirement to work through the Healing Transitions program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the recovery program and Healing Transitions again, really kind of evolved from the Healing Place in Louisville and what their lessons learned were. And so the first thing was they set up, after being open for a while, they set up kind of an engagement path of the program. So when people first come in, they realize that it would take some time for them to buy into the model, you know? And so if you just say, all right, welcome aboard, all of a sudden you've got this responsibility and you've also got to be accountable to your peers. A lot of people aren't ready for that. They're just trying to figure out, you know, 1, do I want to stop using? 2, do I think I can? 3, if I do that, then what? You know, so if I do stop using, what's next? Sometimes it can be incredibly painful to survey the landscape of your life and say, how do I ever overcome this? How do I ever get back to a place where my family is going to talk to me, get out from underneath this pressing child support debt, you know, and things like that. So in the beginning, when people come in, the basic idea is, as an organization, we have an obligation to make recovery attractive to them and to support them in whatever recovery path they want to pursue.
Right.
And what they're supposed to do is show some motivation. And so we'll guarantee a bed and a place to keep your belongings one night at a time if you go to class and attend meetings. Now, you've got regular, you know, chores that you got to do to keep your area clean and so forth, but you don't have a regular responsibility to help run the place. The curriculum we use is called Recovery Dynamics. It was developed by a man named Joe McQuaney from Little Rock, Arkansas. And it takes the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and puts it into 28 group sessions. And so the men and the women in the first stage of the program are attending group sessions 1 through 4, which really help them look at step 1. And so there's, you know, not a lot of high expectation. Things are very kind of clear in what you're supposed to do. You can be talking about leaving. You can be planning to leave. Doesn't matter. You got a guaranteed place to keep your stuff and to stay if you go to class and meetings. Next stage of the program is where we're looking for commitment. So now we've moved away from kind of a motivation and engagement type of relationship to one of commitment. And making a commitment, you're committing to accountability shifting from being staff directed to now being peer based as well.
Okay.
So in the beginning, you know, if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, staff are going to address those things. But at some point, if I'm late, like I'm late here today, you know, I got here at 3:06. I did what I was supposed to by calling and saying, hey, I'm running behind. I hit some traffic. But my peers may say, well, Chris, this is a pattern for you. We've seen you be late for other things. Really want you to understand how that impacts other people.
Right.
You know? And so that type of accountability now shifts from being just a staff only thing to now we're peers, we're sharing the space. This is where we live.
Right.
And so forth. And so with that, you're attending the remaining Recovery Dynamics group sessions, which are 5 through 28. You also have a regular job assignment. And so you may work in the kitchen. It's a long day, but then you're off for 2 days. You may be assigned to security and you may work an 8-hour shift on security and then you're off 2 days. You may be on buildings and ground and work 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday, but you're off on weekends. You're not working second, third shift. And then the peer community will also nominate people for job responsibilities. So one of those is, for instance, a clothing closet supervisor. And somebody may get nominated for that because, hey, the people coming over from the shelter, you know, them seeing you in there will make them feel encouraged because they just saw you where they are.
Right.
You know, so.
Right.
And then we have one last kind of stage, which we call Commit to Recovery 2, which boiled down is really kind of now focusing on where you're going to work, where you're going to move to.
Yeah.
And so we always emphasize the importance of recovery housing as a step down from here.
Right. And so then they step down to recovery housing and work that. Okay. Yeah. Wow. How many individuals do you think have been served through healing transitions over these 20 years? Well, how long has it been around? You said 90s.
Yeah. So we've been providing services for coming up on 24 years. Yeah. So January will be 24 years that we've been providing services. And, you know, there's been 25 to 28,000 people served in various capacities.
Right.
That could be coming in just for cold weather shelter. That could be just coming into emergency shelter. That could be detox. That could be the recovery program. But that's also growing now to include people that we're touching in the community through post-overdose response. and things like that. And so a lot of people touch, and then you can start rippling it out from there and saying what's been the impact upon parents who can sleep at night,
right?
Kids who can focus in school, and so forth. And the highlights. I was asked to say a few words at our ribbon cutting at our women's campus. We just completed some expansion, and I was kind of prompted to describe, well, who are the people that you serve? And I'm like, well, they become little league coaches. They become a district attorney.
Right.
They become, and I'm just going through people in my mind. They become a business owner. They become an employer. They become a softball mom. They become, a volunteer in the community, and just kind of, they become nonprofit founders.
Right.
Like, so we've got people who have gone on to, start nonprofits because they've been inspired and they're doing things. So as I talk about the impact and start thinking about that, I just start describing the roles that people, that I see.
Yeah. You mentioned something a minute ago, made me think about how addiction it really ripples out. It touches so many people, whether you have an experience yourself or a family member or a neighbor or whomever, it's just a ripple effect. It seems like it touches everyone. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to like stigma and shame that still encompasses the addiction community or people in addiction recovery?
Yeah, and this is kind of an understandable thing. I understand some of the basis for it and so forth. I don't think that people are just cold-hearted or anything like that. But and part of this came about from doing a lot of crisis intervention team education for law enforcement. Like, I'd recommend anyone, if you want to learn how to speak publicly, present to police. Yeah. Like, they're an audience that, you can see what they're thinking.
Yeah.
So, over the years, the real kind of common thing is that people look at it as being there's a role of choice that's involved, right? Like, you had to make a decision to pick up a drink or a drug. Yeah. And so if I'll phrase the question, do you think addiction is similar to hypertension and diabetes? Historically, people really kind of fall into no, like, people didn't choose to become diabetic or to have hypertension. There's a choice here. And so then we start trying to I try to help examine what that choice is, and so how well do we do as a society in emphasizing prevention and protecting people who we know are at risk? Kind of like any adolescent that's exposed to alcohol and other drugs or the developing brain has a risk factor. But if you start piling on things like there's a family history or there's adverse childhood experiences, things like that, how well are we protecting, and engaging with people? Yeah. And I get pretty interested in, like, we can have compassion when we see people impacted by addiction at a young age, but less compassion for them later on when they're actively in it. The other thing about what contributes to stigma, again, some pretty realistic things, which are I've heard referred to as negative externalities, which means, like, addiction tends to have different public health and public safety impacts on others that, for instance, hypertension may not at the same. So that's another reason why it can be looked at differently. But I think a few other things that happen is that when people get into recovery, they tend to be kind of private about it. That can be for a variety of reasons. They may be fearful about what people will think of them, or they may feel like, part of my recovery identity is based in some humility and things like that. But, if people don't see folks in recovery, don't know folks in recovery, then, essentially they, kind of form their own opinion. So, if they don't see that folks are in recovery, then they don't see that recovery is possible. So there is a value in people speaking up about their recovery. I tended to be a little more guarded about who I shared my own recovery status with. And it was probably around 2012 where I had an intern who applied to NC State and didn't get in. And one of the reasons was they didn't consider his grades at Wake Tech, which occurred when he got into recovery and went back to school.
Wow.
And they were just looking at his grades from Western Carolina. And so it led me to kind of speak up in the school over there and say, hey, like, I don't share this much, but I'm a person in recovery. You've entrusted me to teach a class. You've entrusted me to supervise your students in internships. You've asked me to chair your advisory board. And so, when people have the opportunity to be supported and not just like get into recovery, but have a chance to rebuild a life,
right?
Like they become valuable and they become people that you trust and rely upon and so forth. And that whole experience just led me to see that there's value for me to be a little more open about my own recovery experience and so forth.
Yeah. It seems like, at least the people I talk with on a more regular basis, even through the podcasting and whatnot, just networking, people in recovery that I encounter do seem to be very open about their recovery journey and wanting to inspire and help others.
Yeah.
Because again, going back to that point, addiction touches all of us.
Mm-hmm. Sure does. I'm driving over here and I'm on the phone with a friend who's trying to help her cousin whose son has addiction,
Right. Yeah. No, I think that if you're living and breathing, you're going to come in contact, with someone who's experiencing an addiction issue, one way or the other. So do you mind sharing a little bit about your recovery journey?
Sure. Yeah. And just kind of, I can probably be somewhat brief about this.
Yeah, I was going to say high level.
Yeah. So the way when I'm asked to share about it is I had a series of alienating and difficult experiences. And substances were something that made me feel alive. So that's kind of in a nutshell. So when I was 8, I got hit in the head with a brick and we were in a new town. So I'm in the hospital. It was challenging being in the hospital. My parents weren't there. Go back to school. I'm the kid wearing a hockey helmet. Oh. So kids go out at recess. I put on my helmet, go to the library. So from an early age, internalized a lot, felt a lot of alienation, started experiencing depression by 10 or 11 or so. And so, depression, self-harm, substances were kind of all part of the adolescent experience I had. Was sent to counselors, both by family, by the school, experienced, separation in my family, when my dad left. Dad stayed in our lives and was very loving and supportive, but that was, a difficult, impactful type of experience. Was introduced to addiction recovery mutual aid at age 16, went to outpatient treatment at 18, inpatient treatment at 19. But the things that really became impactful for me were what happened after treatment. And, one of it was getting a job at a restaurant where the guy that ran the kitchen says to me on the first day I'm working, he says, I'm sober 13 years and can look another person in the eye today. And I said, I got a treatment 4 days ago. He says, well, we've got a recovery meeting here on Tuesdays, and the people that are in recovery and around this, they come hang out in the kitchen. So all of a sudden I had this guy hanging out, looking after me, and, Bernie, I spoke with him in August as he marked 48 years of continuous recovery.
Wow.
Yeah. And I look at, the influence that he had over me as a 19-year-old getting out of inpatient treatment. Found a lot of support through addiction recovery mutual aid groups. After a couple of years, re-engaged with counseling because depression was still an issue. And then probably about 5 years into recovery, was prescribed an antidepressant. To this day, I still engage with the recovery community and mutual aid groups, and I've continued to do counseling at different times and things to, support me in my continued journey.
Yeah. How wonderful that this fellow that you went to work for at the restaurant encouraged sobriety. Because, we all know a lot of the restaurant culture can be very heavy into substance and alcohol use.
Yeah. He's a beautiful man.
Yeah. Yeah. Another serendipitous moment for you.
I thank him all the time. And he says, it was just God putting me where I was supposed to be.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. And help mentor a young man that needed him at the time. That's so cool. Very cool. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Because I think, we were just talking about stigma. I think a lot of times people, they work, they have neighbors, they shop with individuals that are either in addiction, in the throes of it, or working hard to recover, and they don't even know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's so important for people to recognize.
And I mentioned my dad leaving, and that being a difficult thing. I'm also really grateful for my dad for, trying to adjust our family trajectory, the legacy, and so forth. And so it's always kind of been important for me to maintain that compassion and understanding for, my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, and a lot of times when I'm talking with program participants who are struggling, or trying to, make a decision to go for another day. It's like, like you're doing each day you do this, each time you confront something, that you don't run away from something, you're helping to shift that family legacy,
Right.
and it's something, you're not going to make it perfect, but you're helping to move the trajectory towards, better health and wholeness and
Yeah, for sure.
and things like that.
Breaking generational patterns and stuff like that. Yeah, that's so powerful. Do you talk about recovery with your students at State?
So the course was in person for like the first decade, and so in that it was an opportunity for a lot of conversation about stuff. Some of it may have been my own recovery experience and so forth, and now it's been a virtual asynchronous class, so a little less sense of connections with the students. But I think I generally share with them about my recovery journey and stuff.
Right. So if people want to get involved in helping at Healing Transitions, volunteering, donating, whatever that may look like for them, how would they go about doing so?
So there's one thing that I always talk about. One of our longtime supporters and current board members, his favorite thing is get people to come out and take a tour.
Okay.
And the reason for that is one, it's one thing to hear about something. It's another thing to see something. Right. Seeing it can do a couple things. One, it can make you a resource that more tangible to you. And most people are going to encounter somebody that needs help, as you mentioned, whether that's a family, friend, coworker. At some point in time, somebody's going to need to know about different resources. So doing that helps. When we first opened our men's campus, we talked about that we're going to have to overcome attitudes that neighbors have that are based on, stereotypes and experiences that they may have had.
Right.
And so we're going to have to help persuade people and shift people's views about addiction and homelessness. And so there's, the personal contact and being proximate to people with the problem is one of the best ways to do that. So if somebody takes a tour,
right,
I'm pretty convinced that they'll walk away from there being like, wow, these are courageous men and women. Two, wow, they are really proud of what they're working on. Three, they are very hospitable. And my guess is people will walk away from there, one, believing in recovery, believing in the mission, and knowing about a resource. So that's like the number one thing that I encourage people to do. And what way people can take tours is they can just show up Monday through Friday and say, I heard I could see what goes on here and take a tour.
Right.
Or they can reach out and say, hey, I'd really love to schedule time when staff is going to be available and could meet with me and, and so forth. And so that's always kind of the first way that we suggest. We do some kind of, lack of a better word, not to use graduation, but transition ceremonies for men and women who have finished the program, and you can learn about those on our website. They alternate campuses on the third Thursday. Great chance to kind of come and see and be exposed to recovery. And going back to doing CIT training with law enforcement, a lot of people don't believe that folks can get into recovery. And a lot of that, I think, is due to the fact that our systems of care haven't really been set up to give people the optimal chance to be in recovery. So they often say, well, that person went and got help and they're back using again. So this doesn't work. And I've emphasized the importance of kind of shifting some of that sense of it didn't work because you didn't make it work to it didn't work because you didn't have the right intensity of service and duration of service.
Right.
And so, as a field for people with addiction, with severe substance use disorders, really kind of recognizing that if we're not staying involved with people for up to 5 years, doing check-ups with them and encouraging and helping them navigate the next, kind of thing that they have to work through as they're rebuilding their life. If we're absent from that, then we're not contributing to their chances of having a good outcome.
Right. And so how does Healing Transitions help with that 5-year outlook?
Yeah. So when we looked at a few things, when we looked at overcrowding, we realized that expanding our campuses would only postpone, it wouldn't prevent future overcrowding. So we got to get better at particularly supporting people. So in the early days, if you had finished the program, we'd be in touch with you for a year. And so it's kind of like, well, we need to broaden who's getting outreach from us. And so the vision is whether you're with us for an hour or a year, right? Everyone's getting outreach, and a year is a little too limited. So we want to look at a 5-year, approach. So we've got probably going back about 7 years, funded a staff position that is in charge of recovery outreach, and they may leverage other volunteers and things like that to help with it. But it's really, like just being present in somebody's life. Like, people can leave our place, and the folks that are present in their life are the people they used to use with, the people that used to sell to them and so forth. And if we want them to have a fair shot, like they've got to have other forces present in their life to help them say, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think, as I've seen Raleigh just boom and all the building and construction, all that going on, do you think that has really exacerbated the homeless problem?
So,
Raleigh?
I mean, one of the things that around homelessness, and particularly our colleague Emila with the city would talk about this, the lack of affordable housing is the biggest driver for why there's homelessness. And that, is something that's common in many communities, particularly a community that's growing like this, being able to keep up with the growth. And right now it's becoming really hard for people to afford to live in this community on top of just having enough housing units and so forth. So that's certainly a big thing. For what we've seen, there's been over a 70% increase in the population in Wake County since we opened.
Right.
And with that comes more demand. And that's where our practice of never turning people away kind of started running into, well, we're either going to have to add more capacity, or we're going to have to start turning people away. And then the other thing that we're trying to get better at is, how to be a good community partner and bring those who do services into connecting with people. So if somebody comes to our detox, we don't care if they come to our program or not. Some ways, if we can get them somewhere else and save those beds with us for those who just most desperately need it. So we're trying to just do a better job of linkage and partnership and things like that.
So people can start with a tour. That's your first recommendation.
Yep.
Come see what we're about. And then what else can they do to get involved past that?
Yeah, we get some people that will come and serve meals. We get some people that will show up for events. So the Oakwood 24 event is happening the 21st to the 22nd of December, 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. out at Oakwood Cemetery. People,
and that's the running event.
That's one of our alumni who you interviewed who decided he was going to run for 100 miles over 24 hours to raise money and really kind of build community and things like that. And we, on our website, there should be there should be, I haven't checked in a while. There should be a way to get involved from there. But really, like the tours, we've used some healthcare professionals to volunteer for health clinics that we put on. We've gotten some people that get involved with putting together hygiene bags and a variety of things. So
wonderful. Wow. Yeah. So just some final thoughts. If someone, since you've had a recovery journey or you're still on your recovery journey, if someone is struggling, what are some words of wisdom you'd give them?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things is that, a majority of people over time with continued effort will get into recovery and get stable. So be hopeful and don't be discouraged. Like a lot of times it's also persuading or reminding families, friends, loved ones that recovery is not an event. It's a process.
Right.
Celebrate the successes, celebrate the movement, try to minimize the harm that comes from relapse and things like that. Know that there's a lot of different pathways to get into recovery and to stay in recovery, and don't be afraid to look for the thing that you're attracted to or that aligns with your values and beliefs and so forth. And then this is just kind of a way for me to honor somebody, but also talk a little bit about what I kind of see. So we had a guy that RPD brought to us in December of 2001. So we're open about 11 months at this point. And he comes in and the guy working detox says, "What are your plans for the holidays? Or do you think you'll be here?" And he's like, "No way I'll be here on the holidays. I'm just here for a couple nights and I'm back out." And so this guy, through exposure, one of our things is about 70% of our staff have lived experience. Most of those are folks that are been through our program. So he gets enough hope from being exposed to this that this guy, he stays. So you go about a year later, in December 2002, he gets hired part-time with us. So this man, Rayford, passed very suddenly from cancer in May, about 13 days from diagnosis to death. It was very abrupt, very sudden. The day that he moved into hospice, I was asked to speak with some folks, and people were asking, "Well, how do you measure success? What are your outcomes?" And, we got, how many people are in recovery 1 year later? What's the percentage of employed housed 1 year later? We do a W-2 survey around how much people paying in taxes now that they're employed. I said, but the thing we don't measure is what Rayford did. And what Rayford did was he believed in people. And I saw this in particular with a man who'd shown up to visit him in his final days. And that man was there because of all the hardships that he'd experienced in his life, being incarcerated, experiencing relapse, losing a daughter to overdose. No matter many times he struggled, he knew that this guy Rayford always believed in him, and many of us take that kind of for granted.
Yeah.
We know that we have somebody that believes in us, who is in our corner, wants us to do well. But for a lot of the folks that walk through our doors, there's, for somebody to believe in them, is hard to quantify, in terms of the importance of that. And so, just in general, for anyone who's kind of struggling, it's like, there are people out there that will believe in you. Find the community of people that have the experience and have been through a journey where their gratitude is going to be them paying it back to you, and they'll believe in you. And if somebody's believing in you, you're going to have a better shot.
Yeah. And Rayford did that.
Rayford did that unbelievably. And as painful as the loss was, it was really devastating for a lot of people. I had to ask, kind of rhetorically, like, how did we get so lucky to have him for 22 and a half years?
My goodness. Wow.
Why were we that lucky?
Right.
Right. Yeah, this is painful. Yeah, this hurts. But man, how blessed were we for this guy who wasn't going to stay more than a couple days to find recovery. And 15,000 men probably came through that shelter during those 22 and a half years.
My goodness.
All of them got a piece of what he had to offer. And at its base, it was, I'm going to believe in you, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to support you.
Yeah. And those are some really key components right there. I'm going to believe in you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to support you. I think that's what most people are looking for. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. Thank you to Rayford, wherever you are.
Yeah.
May you rest in peace. Thank you for sharing about healing transitions. If people want to find out more, how would they find you? What website do they go to?
Yeah, it's healing-transitions.org. I think we have the regular social media that most places do.
Yeah.
So you can find out from it there. Our men's campus is over by the State Farmers Market restaurant.
Okay.
And our women's campus is over in the Brownlee Business Park, which is near CarMax.
Gotcha. Yes. Okay. And Oakwood 24, if people want to find out more about that.
Yeah. So we got information on our website, Healing Transitions. You can Google Oakwood 24 Healing Transitions. It'll take you right to the page.
Yeah.
We got teams that are fundraising. The guy that I'm doing it with, our goal is 100 miles between us. So I'll be back out with the vest and he'll be running and we'll try to do what one man does.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah.
Try to, two of us to do 100 miles.
So grab your 40-pound rucksack,
Yeah.
sign up for the 24 and get moving. So that is awesome. Well, thanks for coming out today and sharing a little bit about your story, sharing about Healing Transitions. What a great organization in the Raleigh community. If you want to learn more, please go to their website and find out more. And if you like what you've heard today, give us a like, a subscribe, a follow, all those good things. And as always, thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. I appreciate you taking time to listen. These days we live in feel stressful, challenging, and maybe even chaotic. I'm really passionate about putting out positive content that will encourage and inspire others. I ask that you like, follow, subscribe, and even give us a 5-star review. Most of all, share this with your friends and family so together we can help people turn their lives around.